In December 1996, Marvel Entertainment filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, carrying $610 million in debt, with a stock price that had collapsed from $35.75 to $2.38. To survive, the company did something that looks almost unthinkable in hindsight. It auctioned off the film rights to some of its most valuable characters for whatever cash it could raise. Spider-Man went to Sony. The Hulk went to Universal. X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Daredevil went to Fox. 13 years later, when Disney bought what remained of Marvel, it didn't actually own the rights to several of the characters most people picture first when they hear the name. The bankruptcy itself was a genuinely ugly fight. Ronald Perlman had bought Marvel in January 1989 for $82.5 million, and by the mid-1990s, as the comic book speculation bubble collapsed, he'd run the company to the edge of collapse. When Marvel filed for Chapter 11 on December 27, 1996, investor Carl Icahn started buying up its bonds at roughly 20 cents on the dollar, using them to fight Perlman for control. Icahn won the board in June 1997, but before he could finalize his own restructuring plan, Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad, the executives running Marvel's toy licensee Toy Biz, struck an 11th hour deal with the banks that outmaneuvered both Perlman and Icahn, merging Toy Biz into Marvel by the end of 1997. By the time the dust settled and Marvel emerged from bankruptcy, the film rights that had kept the company solvent during its worst years were gone for good, sold to whoever would pay for them at the time. Disney bought the surviving company in December 2009 for roughly $4.2 billion in cash and stock, gaining access to a library of more than 5,000 characters. Ike Perlmutter, who by then owned 37% of Marvel and ran the company, personally walked away with about $1.5 billion from the deal. Standard & Poor's put Disney's own credit rating on negative watch at the time. Unhappy that Disney was paying 37 times Marvel's 2009 earnings for a company in the middle of a recession. What Disney's $4 billion actually bought, though, came with an asterisk nobody could remove. Spider-Man belonged to Sony. X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Daredevil belonged to Fox. Those licensing deals from the bankruptcy years predated the acquisition and simply carried over, untouched, into Disney's ownership. Somehow, the part of Marvel that Disney did fully control turned out to be more than enough. Starting with Iron Man in 2008, built on Thor, Captain America, and an ensemble Avengers movie that assembled everyone Marvel still owned outright, the Marvel Cinematic Universe grew into the highest-grossing film franchise in history, crossing $31 billion in cumulative worldwide box office by 2025, ahead of Star Wars at roughly $10.3 billion and Harry Potter at roughly $9.5 billion combined. Disney built the most successful franchise in the history of cinema for its first decade without its two most commercially proven characters, because it had no other choice. Getting those characters back took two separate deals on wildly different scales. The smaller one came first. In 2015, Marvel and Sony worked out an arrangement letting Spider-Man appear inside the MCU's own films while Sony kept control of his solo movies and the larger share of what they earned. A compromise rather than a real reunification. The bigger move came in 2019, and it wasn't really a Marvel deal at all on paper. Disney initially agreed to pay $52.4 billion for 21st Century Fox in December 2017, then raised the offer to $71.3 billion after a counterbid from Comcast, finally closing the acquisition in March 2019. The deal brought over Fox's film and TV studios, the Avatar franchise, FX, a stake in National Geographic, and a bigger share of Hulu. But the detail Marvel fans actually cared about was buried inside all of it. The X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and Deadpool came back in-house too. Disney spent nearly 18 times what it paid for Marvel itself, for a deal whose stated logic was mostly about streaming content and studio assets, largely just to finish undoing a fire sale forced by a bankruptcy that had happened a decade before Disney ever got involved. Even with the rights puzzle finally solved, the machine hasn't run in a straight line since. The Marvels became the MCU's lowest grossing film ever released, a title previously held by 2008's The Incredible Hulk and entries like Ant-Man and The Wasp. Quantumania and Eternals underperformed against expectations, feeding a genuine superhero fatigue narrative in the trade press even as the franchise kept adding to its all-time cumulative total. The characters are all finally under one roof. Whether audiences still want to watch all of them at the same pace they used to is a separate question Disney hasn't fully answered yet. Put the full timeline together, and the real price of owning Marvel was never the $4 billion Disney wired in 2009. It was that number, plus a Spider-Man compromise that still splits the profits with Sony, plus a $71.3 billion acquisition of an entirely different media company, largely to buy back pieces that Marvel itself had already sold off just to survive. The company Disney thought it was purchasing in 2009 turned out to be missing parts, and finishing the purchase took another decade and another studio's entire library to complete.